Hi everyone. Welcome to Mercy's thesis reading. Yeah, not even any words to say how brilliant we think Mercy is. And yeah, it's just been a privilege to work with her, work with you. Welcome to everyone, especially to Mercy's family, who's traveled from various places to be here. We're going to start out, Katie's going to read a piece to set the space for Mercy's ideas and feelings and marvelous work, and it's a blessing as well. Katie?
The feeling of Mercy's thesis process, at least from the outside, was very spring-like. Generative mud, havoc, unseen things with tremendous and palpable force. Clarity suddenly emerging in assertive, fragile glory. Mercy's thesis was constantly overflowing, thought and life and reality and dreams multiplying, subverting themselves, blessing and combusting themselves. This thesis, as a friend put it, is Mercy's life project. It has been flowing and will flow onwards. This thesis is, therefore, like an eddy, a deep pool the river collects in for a moment. Dear community, to hear this thesis, you'll need to move your ears. Move them down to your heart for now, down to your gut. Let Mercy's thoughts move. Let them flash in and fade out as you listen. Your usual trained ways of listening will get in the way today. Let them come and go. Return to your gut. There are things in this thesis, so many things, that you and this community and the world need. The thirst for these thoughts is so old, so deep, that your head self might not recognize it at first. Or your head self will try to taxidermy the thought, to make it solid, static, contained. Instead, on Mercy's behalf, I encourage you to be a body for the duration of this reading. Feel your toes in your shoes, your thighs on your chair, your spine holding you up to listen. Feel the curve of your ears catching Mercy's voice, here in this afternoon light, here in a room full of ears tunneling down into hearts. Observing the unfolding of Mercy's thesis work has been one of the greatest joys of Hannah and I's life and teaching life for sure. Mercy's thoughts are crucial. They're so beautifully, truthfully expressed. This thesis is alive. Mercy, Hannah and I are honored to have spent this time with your ever-expanding, deeply restorative thought. We have learned so much from you. It's pure joy to be here today, watching this work hit the air. Congratulations.
Thank you. Actually, okay. Thank you. I'm going to start by reading my acknowledgements. Katie and Hannah, words are falling away. How to thank you enough. You gave me the confidence and space to trust in my own voice and the beautiful and interesting gift of being able to hear your voices. You both have affected me profoundly. Agnes, asker of questions. Thank you for reading my thesis so thoughtfully and encouragingly, and for caring about my whole person these 4 years. Your curiosity and eccentricity are inspiring. Holly, thank you for being a huge supporter and encourager, for holding me when I cry, for helping me to be more okay with my body, and for all those trips to the Irving for Polar Pops. The effervescence got me through. Bethany, my partner in crime, we made it. Rochelle, Lauren, and Shady, for solidarity, I'm so lucky to have you all as friends. You have helped me process so many of these ideas. My mama, thank you for your integrity. You showed me that love and intelligence go hand in hand. You have a fierce capacity for thought and feeling. I have learned so much from you. My papa, for always telling me I could do anything, and trying to get me to believe I am amazing, for being the best puppet in the whole world, and giving me the comfort and security of knowing I could go to you for anything. Jake and Willem, you inspire me to write. I love you. Ian, I never would have considered writing a thesis if it weren't for you. When we became friends, I started to stop seeing myself as lack, and for all your love and support throughout this whole process. Thank you. So I'm going to be reading from my computer, and I'm going to have the words up on screen. I process things better visually, so I just wanted you all to be able to see the words. And I'm mostly just going to be reading. It is better to raise up the ground and dissolve the form. I used to draw trees that looked more like roots, or seaweed, or something ancient growing down. I never got the upness down, I guess. Somehow still thought I was in the branches. A woman's a different thing entirely. Who knows where a woman begins and ends? Listen, mistress, I have roots. I have roots deeper than this island, deeper than the sea, older than the raising of the lands. I go back into the dark. I go back into the dark. Before the moon I am. What a woman is, a woman of power, a woman's power, deeper than the roots of trees, deeper than the roots of islands. Older than the making, older than the moon. Who dares ask questions of the dark? Who will ask the dark its name? But in the canons I was told were great, nobody ever drew themselves as roots. How was I to know that that was a thing a person could be? To find what is true, what is real, what is alive, we are always told to look up instead of down and around, trying to overcome the world to reach God instead of traveling deeper into the heart of it. We're told that it's in the blueness of the sky, in its simplicity, that we conceive of goodness. The complexity of the down and around confounds us, degrades us, terrifies us. This is where witches burn. But what is the secret to becoming transcendence? Transcendence, the state of excelling or surpassing or going beyond usual limits, or a state of being or existence above and beyond the limits of material experience. Synonym, superiority. Type of domination, mastery, supremacy. By definition, transcendence requires repression and domination. It involves a binary, and binaries involve hierarchy. If transcendence is the goal, we will always, always be trying to discard, cast off, and overcome immanence. Within the masculine-feminine binary, it is the feminine that holds the position of inferiority. Read, needs to be discarded, overcome, cast off. I use the terms masculine and feminine with the understanding that the binary relationship between male and female has been socially and culturally constructed. Feminine here is meant to signify the constructed category, acknowledging that it is not inherently separate from the masculine. The terms feminine and masculine are also not interchangeable for male and female. The former refer to gender polarities, which are socially constructed, and the latter to sex, which is biological. These terms should not be seen as synonymous. Body, emotion, blood, vulnerability, weakness, and earth are not inherently female, but have been culturally and historically linked to the feminine. In her article, Women as Body, Ancient and Contemporary Views, Elizabeth Spellman explains that the great Plato believed that true knowledge, the closest one might come to objectivity or to the world of forms, transcendence, comes from the soul, and that in order to access it, the body and the lower parts of the soul must be controlled and repressed. The body is appetitive, feral, and irrational, and therefore clouds objectivity, tricking the body into believing that beauty, or knowledge, exists in things seen, smelled, and touched. But Plato insisted, true beauty exists only in the world of forms, a world the body has no access to. A world the body has no access to? Obstruction. Women, however, have historically been seen as more intimately connected to their materiality because of a cavernous anatomy and iron-rich blood cycles like moon, like earth, like emptiness. Women have a harder time transcending nature as their bodies are propelled by it, the theory goes. Girls are told they are not inferior to boys, and yet the message is this: you are equal inasmuch as you can become like a man, just as men are men inasmuch as they refuse to act like women. In order to become equal, then, we must learn to hate, transcend everything that is feminine, because it represents lack and inferiority. translation. We must learn to hate weakness, emotion, vulnerability, irrationality, and reproduction. It seems to me, however, that we are all subject to the same decay, the same being of a body. We are all tied to our flesh, hormones, and affections. And what about the possibility that our glands might prove to be highly receptive to knowledge? I would like to make an opening for the possibility that it is not at all desirable for any of us, including men, to transcend this ground of earth and body and feeling, that in fact it is desirable to be there and explore it and dissolve the binaries altogether by raising it up. In truth, all forms are dissolved when they are reflected in this rising ground. The feminine does not obstruct the pursuit of knowledge. It is a point of connection, interaction, creation with it, that has the potential to bring us deeper into the heart of the world. Pretending otherwise means not only that women and their interests remain neglected and undeveloped, but also that the domain of concept itself remains impoverished, without the productive and surprising input of other interests and perspectives, other morphologies. How does one write a theory of difference in a language that values sameness? There is no syntax to speak this ground into existence, but it does exist, an extension of God, not just as your representation, but as living, breathing, knowing, feeling, decaying, bleeding, dying ground. They have left us only absences, defects, negatives to name ourselves. Simone de Beauvoir explains that through a systematic production of the category of woman, women have been made, have even made themselves man's inferior by adhering to this category, a category that has been defined by lack. Woman means negative space. I have spent a lot of time looking for a positive space to inhabit, to name myself by. Translation: a masculine, rational, dominating space, affirmed by the negativity of other spaces. I ached to have a positive electrical current running through me, to speak from a place of fullness, not of lack. I tried to be calm, rational, and distanced, in the hopes of being heard in order to explain. I would speak, stuttering, turned to anger, turned to tears. Time and time again, I fell back into emptiness, because I don't know anything to be true in words. I am made of pavement rainbows after morning rain. How is that spoken, and where can I speak it? I'm doing the work of moving myself out of emptiness and into excess, dirt, and animal. I am not lack, but too much to be written or made or spoken or made linear, too much to be made sense of. I have to cast off woman as representation and burrow deeper into the world, to make of it my company, my hearth, my sadness, and my joy. It is in these lines or tunnels that I find what is most real, most touching and feeling and seeing and communing. This is where I want to be, swimming in the undercurrents. Here, there are 1,000 ways of knowing, and all of them are strong and true, melting into the gold-pink edge of clouds in winter, church steeples out my kitchen window, being in a particular place at a particular time, ice, impersonal sadness, my body, some clean thing like a hyacinth. Not that I can't, but that I refuse, don't want to communicate or hold knowledge in a linear, detached, straightforward way. I find no joy, no truth, no real substance there, only traps. Don't weep. One day we will learn to say ourselves. But perhaps in weeping I do speak myself. Perhaps I have already always been speaking myself, but in private. Perhaps my weakness is my strength. But I must speak myself to you, not as silence, but as excess, overflow, fluidity. To speak earth to darkness, in darkness, running into each other and ourselves. This is love-making, love-weaving. And it requires risking nonsense, chaotic language leafings, unspeakable breaches of usage, intuitive leaps. Where are all the bodies? Where is my page full of bodies, full of shit and slime and blood and breast milk? Where are the women, women's bodies, women's words, women's power? Where is my body in all its wretched, grotesque glory? If we continue to speak sameness, if we speak to each other as men have spoken for centuries, as they taught us to speak, we will fail each other. Again, words will pass through our bodies, above our heads, disappear, make us disappear. Far above, absent from ourselves, we become machines. If we don't invent a language, if we don't find our bodies, language, its gestures, will be too limited to accompany our story. To talk in circles and in quiet, to call on meanings not yet meant, to speak of water. There is a torrent I have turned into empty, into void, into I don't know anything in your language, into I don't know anything at all, except when I am alone and become everything again, feel everything again, sheer and dense and tragic. Knowledge. But this knowledge is more, should be more than private and personal. And every once in a while I'm surprised when someone is surprised to find I know anything at all, because I often feel like I know quite a lot. She is used to tripping out on layers of complexity in total silence. But it is trudging and hurting and impossible feeling to write of darkness and roundness, and to write without trying to possess the words or other people and their feelings with them. You need a new model, a shattering, a decreation, and a new way of weaving, all the while not wanting to get locked into comprehension or to create a new code. Always nomadic, always lost, and that is part of it. That is just part of it. Sorry, my mouth is really dry. My body represents an intersection between my small self and the larger self of everything else, such as air, water, earth, animals, events, other people, etc. The undifferentiated abyss, the black nothingness, the indeterminate animal in which everything is dissolved. Someone once had a dream that I was taking them on a tour through hell, a hell in which I was destroying myself to destroy this other person. In the dream, I had a secret attic space that I would retreat to. I invited him to visit me there, but wouldn't believe him when he told me he wanted to. I would love to come to your attic, he said, loving, tender. You don't really, I snarled. I led him there reluctantly, but the attic is a trick, a trap, a manipulation. My dream space, the attic attack. I'm playing a video on a loop, a white nothingness that I force him to watch. The calm surface upon which float unconnected determinations, like scattered members, a head without a neck, an arm without a shoulder, eyes without brows. Then I stapled my face, bleeding for attention. This dream made me feel like a witch, a body from the unholy mountain, insects crawling around under my skin, as if my weakness acts as a barrier between me and God, as if my fluidity, my blood, my effectiveness are a curse, a trap, a trick, a manipulation. Everything that associates me with the feminine supposedly makes me further away from being able to encounter the truth. So I pretend not to bleed. I have to. I want to be heard. I ache for power. But then, where does truth go? Where does God go? When you refuse to let the world affect you, where does God go? But what if knowing takes different forms? Or what if it is formless? Includes everything that has fallen away. One of the first lessons about living is the one that consists of knowing how to avoid getting closed in by knowledge, knowing more and less than what one knows, knowing how not to understand, while never being on the side of ignorance. It is not a question of not having understood anything, but of not letting oneself get locked into comprehension. Each time that we come to know something, in reality, it is a step. Then we have to strike out for the unknown, to make our way along in the dark with an apple in our hand, like a candle, to see the world with the fingers. I'll start to think in words, words that morph and morph, words that smell like clouds and beetles, words that smell like yellow. One leads to another, leads to another, leads to what is translation. As the crow flies, 80 kilometers an hour, stealing me away from you, as I kick at the impossibility of a silhouette, their words, the gag upon my lips. There are at least two ways of doing anything. Opening ourselves to this truth means exposing ourselves to the transformative effect of knowledge that stems from oral traditions, from earth knowledge, from intuition and emotional connection, from pain and suffering, from communally derived knowledges, from collectivity and relationality, from animal whisperings, etc., to the potential that truth might come from the other, from the mother, from the other than Western rationalist, other than white male capitalist. Different bodies breed different experiences, soft and round. Essential to knowing is the realization that none of us truly can possess anything or control each other. We exist in a network of energies, information, emotions, skin, wind, and affections. Permeable. It's all permeable. Who is to say where you begin and end? And without these boundaries, how can you speak of territory, of ownership? To dream of possession is to dream of closing yourself off from this network. I tell myself, my body is not mine. I am not mine. I am a body through which a dream flows. Open your body to God, to earth, to connection. Offer yourself to the whole. I am not mine. The point where power falls away, the point of approaching knowledge. Do you know what you really want to be now? Yes, love in all its shattered forms. Objection. Blood, decay, empathy make us vulnerable. Vulnerable to having ourselves undone, making us permeable, causing us to disintegrate into each other and the world. We converge, and convergence is terrifying. The abject is whatever we are trying to keep out to maintain ourselves as whole and distinct, or safe. Whatever threatens the boundaried self. This makes sense and is necessary to some extent, but in my experience, most of us verge on being too boundaried rather than too permeable. We are still hiding from a lot of things and hurting a lot of people. Image of a world without lack or decay. Sterile and straight-faced like a hospital smells. A chemical sweetness that makes you think you must be dying at the wrong time in the wrong way. Incisions and undercover body fluids. It's a closing space. I used to go knocking on the doors there, bags packed full of hate and resentment, waiting for someone to let me in. Experiment. Draw myself a bath and turn the music up louder than I'm comfortable with. Tell myself, I am here, in this grungy bathroom. This is where my body is. Not everything is accessible from here. Watch as flakes of blood tumble out of me and become part of the bath water. This blood doesn't look healthy. It is dry and separate, and does not flow, but it does shimmer a bit. Or is that the music? Is this blood really mine? Pretending always that our true selves are the selves we become in health. But when honest, is the self we imagine ever really here, ever really with me in the bathroom? I have to be willing to accept an imperfect body, not just aesthetically, but biologically as myself. Reconditioning one's aesthetic map, deterritorialize. My mother says no one can escape it, the body returning to God. Forever trying to interrupt the body returning to God, we have become incapable of absorbing pain, always deflecting it onto someone else, perpetuating the cycle of violence. I don't want to become transcendence anymore. I want to morph and morph and morph, to turn into material, into vine, to become a tender creeper. For if we did not forget that we were atoms, we would live and love differently, more humbly, more expansively. And what is the reason for doing anything, if not to expand your capacity for love? So if you were wondering, no, I was the one who was wondering. This is not the devil's work. I will become my body, goddammit, and my body will become my text. Pages and pages of uncontainable flow, of affects and intensities. Turning lack into connection, redefining lack as connection. The roots, the soil, the lowest of the low, the darkness, the body, are all carriers, generators of information. my second part if I had parts. I was pulling a string of words out of my abdomen, either as an offering or an exorcism, or both. Soft and boundless, my insides on the outside. And even God was terrified? But why can't it be God that flows through me, even in my body words, especially in my body words? Sometimes there is warmth in winter and hollowness in spring. What appears good might not always be good. In the process of exploring this feminine space that exists out of bounds and in the dark, I find something rich and deep and very complex. But I also find a tremendous amount of fear and intimidation. Sometimes at night, often really, I become petrified. The places I go digging, are they not of the devil? At night, when fear finds me small and willing, I recant. I vow to God to abandon my inner witch, my female self, if he will only protect me from the devil, from burning. How did Joan of Arc not repent? How did she hold the belief that she was of God, while all those men insisted she was not? What is it that happens when the sun sets, and they start insisting you are not of God? In daylight, I sing hymns of winter tulips, dancing around the most joyous parts of my pain, sneaking colors into voids, knocking on wood, eating spaghetti with my hands. A sacrilegious, blasphemous witch, charring lemons, sipping their sour, showering in light. But night fell fast, and he started calling me his own. That fucking snake was in my bed. If you are not for me, then you are against me. I don't know who's speaking anymore. And in that space was hell, jagged and insincere. Throughout the 14th through 17th centuries, there was a craze for hunting witches in Europe. Something around this time must have inspired an epidemic of women to make pacts with the devil, partaking in satanic orgies, turning men into animals, stealing babies for their bones. Sexual enchantresses, the devil's henchwomen. Some theories credit this epidemic to an outbreak of hysteria or the peasantry having gone mad. In The Gender of Sound, Canadian poet and essayist Anne Carson explains that in ancient Greece it was believed that women lacked the capacity for reason. We have no doubt inherited this perspective, granted with some adaptation. Female sounds, then, were supposedly not first translated by reason and self-control. These virtues belonged to men, and men were thus responsible for directing women in this way. Woman is that creature who puts the inside on the outside, by projections and leakages of all kinds. Somatic, vocal, emotional, sexual. Females expose or expend what should be kept in. These sounds were relegated to the space outside of the polis, the mountains and beaches, the land of the wolves, of marginality and the unbounded. Sounds of intense pain and intense pleasure, the semiotic, the undignified, the unrestrained, the untranslated. How beautiful. What makes a heretic, deviant, or transgressive? For women in ancient Greece, as well as elsewhere, it has been as easy as speaking themselves, or making a disorderly female sound, sounds that have from antiquity been defined as curving, dark, secret, evil, ever-moving, not self-contained and lacking its own boundaries. This noise always threatens the boundaries, the containment, the borders of the male establishment. For feminine sounds to be made in public or in civic space was and is totally threatening. What strategies have been used to keep the unbounded unspoken and the male establishment safe? Putting a door on the female mouth has been an important project of patriarchal culture from antiquity to the present day. Its chief tactic is an ideological association of female sound with monstrosity, disorder, and death. What better way to silence women than to associate the very sound of their voices, the very structure of their bodies with negative spiritual energy, so that when a woman tries to speak herself or connect herself to her body and the earth, she becomes incapacitated by fear? Could it be that in the 14th century, in Europe, women were starting to speak themselves, or that the church and state were starting to notice the political threat of the speaking women? Ehrenreich, social critic, activist, and author of Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, A History of Women Healer, suggests, and she is not the only one to do so, that the witch hunts were actually well-organized campaigns initiated, financed, and executed by church and state in order to silence and control women who did not cooperate with and submit to their political or religious agendas. Witches then were and are women who pose a threat to male power. If this is not the truth, it is also not a lie. Although these hunts happened a long time ago, they have left residual effects that are with us, or at least with me today, including a fear of fluidity and of knowledge that comes through the earth or the body, fear of darkness or a female standing up to power, fear of being the one to stand up to power, and the terror that comes into my room at night, taunting me to recant of the feminine, to be silent, because it is an expression of evil, even though it seems to be leading me closer to what I imagined Christ was like. Isn't the real danger that fear can blind us to love, and that we are so easily deceived? Jesus came down to earth to live in the flesh, in the heart of the world, that this was the holiest love, to be a body among bodies and to suffer with the world. The shadow of a reddening. Growing up in church, I was taught that there is dark and there is light, and that that is that. But is not evil intricate, complicated, and elusive? Sometimes light is disguised as darkness, and darkness as light. Or maybe these are the wrong terms altogether. Rebecca Solnit, American writer and activist, writes, "Most people are afraid of the dark, literally when it comes to children, and many adults fear above all the darkness that is the unknown, the unseeable, the obscure. And yet, the night in which distinctions and definitions cannot be readily made is the same night in which love is made, in which things merge, change, become enchanted, aroused, impregnated, possessed, released, renewed. So if you are wondering, no, I was the one who was wondering. This is not the devil's work. How easily we are deceived. We are entrenched in a culture in which for millennia both the female voice and body have represented excess, the abject, and the mired, the spat out. Thus, they have been relegated to the space of silence, shame, and fear, as these are things that threaten identity, independence, and power. If protecting the self from said space is to guard power and privilege, then what does it mean to explore these spaces, to walk out of the self and into abjection, to relinquish, the point where power falls away? In this light, what does goodness become? Isn't it possible that there is goodness out of bounds in the limitless? Isn't this one of God's very essences, limitlessness? Nelson writes, "A good many have figured God as light, but a good many have also figured him as darkness. Some might say that it is dangerous to talk of God as darkness or as absence. How can an absence be great? To which I might reply that I have experienced an emptiness turn so full, and that perhaps absences are actually overwhelming presences if we dare to speak of them, to call on them. I am trying to refuse to be intimidated. I am looking for God. I am looking for mercy. I will not be dictated by my resistance, but by my exploration. To shatter even our love so that we might finally become capable of loving. To shatter the feminine as representation in order to finally become capable of going there. To shatter goodness in order to finally become capable of it. You should become a fool in order to become truly wise. I am looking for God. It's important to me that you know that." This looking is a part of something bigger. And opening yourself to it is also opening yourself to something much too large and ancient that weaves fibers of pain and joy between all of us, that ground us in each other. Sometimes words fall away, but in that place, my body. Sometimes what I need to say will have to be pulled out of my abdomen in hideous fashion. But having the right to show up and speak are basic to survival, to dignity, and to liberty. I want to extend this right to my body and other bodies, recognizing that our flesh is a container for memories, and for joy and pain and anger. Body screams and cries and bleeds. I must speak this place to you. Grief is information. I think this kind of speaking has in the past been labeled hysteria. But is it simply what happens to people, to bodies that are forced to live in silence? To people and bodies we refuse to listen to. We back them up into the corner of insanity. I have become hysterical myself many times and felt its meaning as emptiness, as disorder, as having nothing to communicate but insanity. I think perhaps I was confused as to how it's possible for there to be a world beyond words, a world impossible for words. Where power falls away, where the body becomes so bound, so helpless with the need to communicate its pain. The world is wrong. You can't put the past behind you. It's buried in you. It's turned your flesh into its own cupboard. So what happens when an individual, intentionally or accidentally, opens their flesh cupboard and you find yourself looking in to see a reflection of you, your race, your gender, that is ugly, that is evil? Ugliness and evil you might have been trying to disguise as goodness. You are afraid that the cupboard might swallow you up, that it might obliterate you. This cry of frustration, desperation, you need to listen to me, something is wrong, we take for childish, angry, and immature behavior, and or demonic, possessed. But sometimes people literally have been possessed, somebody else's property. The easiest thing to do with screaming bodies is to silence them, to leave no room for the sounds and feelings of other people, because we might find ourselves affected, dissolving. And so we make a closing of ourselves, and a revulsion, shit, silence, whatever we are trying to keep out. This pushing into exile makes parts of truth, reality, God, unnameable, unlocatable, untouchable, loathsome and terrifying. How then do we go there when it feels contrary to all the laws of nature? To will yourself with all your strength into a place of weakness. To walk out of the self and into abjection. Turn yourself into an opening. Opening, dissolving. This brings me to sadness, bleeding, the point where things get dark. Is darkness necessarily bad? My stomach starts to swell and I feel myself opening to the world, between the ribs, my ribs, the abject making a home of me, touching me. Parts of me wanted to stop because it hurts to die and die and die, to merge, to spill out into all the other people, all the other places, the intensity of it, the energy and the grief, the feeling of the physical presence of my heart inside my body. How can the world be so there? I am not blowing things up. Things are always already blowing up. To bleed is to be going into a time of grieving and of knowing, of being vulnerable to information. I am not deluded, it's just that everything is getting in. This is not just personal. This female consciousness can hold these states of pain and longing as well. Chris Kraus, who is an American writer and art and literary critic, who talks a lot about blurring the distinction between the personal and political, and of emotion as political. Chris Kraus makes an argument for empathic sadness as an access point for connection, for knowledge. Does sadness, panic, grief unlock a roadmap that takes us further out into the heart of sadness? As I settle into this heart of sadness, things start getting dark. I'm the most real, but I'm also the most scared. It is bleak midwinter. Is this what is real? To die and die and die, again and again and again, dying forever? Maybe I am just a child whose holding environment failed her. That while a baby may not die when its holding environment fails, it may indeed die and die and die. Nonetheless, Nelson explains this dying is described not as lack or void, but as substantive. Whether or not my sadness stems from dysfunction or not is irrelevant. It is still substance. Grief is information. Krauss explains that very little has been written within philosophy that treats emotion as an active state of consciousness. In Krauss's opinion, Jean-Paul Sartre rejects this possibility. He says emotion is escape. Escape from what? A flight into a magical world that offers refuge from the need to act responsibly? Emotion should be avoided. But how? Is it reason that keeps me from being debilitated or overcome by fear? Was I trying to abandon reason? Or is reason not as separated from emotion as we all believe? Is what I have fallen into just real without any way to cope with it? When the sadness of other people lingers in me, and I don't know if I've just latched myself onto it in order to be erased, or if I'm connecting to some bigger canyon of despair that is a meeting place. I just don't know. Simone Weil's body was so saturated, French mystic and philosopher, was so saturated with content that she felt her head would split apart. So full of panic, grief, and sadness. Weil was quite literally consumed by empathy. The more you think, the more impossible it is to eat. Simone Weil died in part of literal starvation. For Weil, as well as for Krauss, it was impossible to drink the coffee without thinking about the Inca laborers who picked it. Impossible to view the paintings at the Frick Museum without thinking about the murdered workers. Impossible to admire a $2,500 pair of shredded Perry Ellis jeans without thinking 84% of the world's wealth is owned by 7% of its people. They was utterly overwhelmed by the panic of altruism. People have accused Faye of self-hatred, of a hatred for her Jewishness and womanness. I can't claim to know whether this is true or not, but I often feel full and angry with all it means to be a woman in a world unkind to women, and overflowing with rage at my own womanness having to belong to me. Furious with sadness and silence having to belong to me. But Vey shows me how I fall into the trap of gravity again and again. Gravity is the force that perpetuates degradation. She shows me how I am complicit in this force and teaches me to strive for grace and not revenge. She writes, "Not to exercise all the power at one's disposal is to endure the void. This is contrary to all the laws of nature. Grace alone can do it. Not to endure the void is to submit to the force of gravity, to the fascism in us all, in our heads and in our everyday behavior, the fascism that causes us to love power, to desire the very thing that dominates and exploits us. The trap is so deep and so tricky that it can sometimes deceive you into thinking that mastering it, becoming the most powerful one in the trap, will allow you to conquer it and break free. I do not want to be the degraded one. What can I do to undegrade myself? A hurtful act is the transference to others of the degradation which we bear in ourselves. That is why we are inclined to commit such acts as a way of deliverance. But this mires me in my pain even more. This is not freedom, but a question of how to work the trap that one is inevitably in. The most subversive thing, the most anti-trap maneuver, is to stop the flow by absorbing it, by turning it into suffering, sadness, connection, earth, turning it on its head, into an encounter with information. Not to exercise all the power at one's disposal is to endure the void. This is contrary to all the laws of nature. Grace alone can do it. To endure the place of not being, the place of being forsaken by God. From this space, you start to move toward grace, and it starts to move toward you, contrary to all the laws of nature. Because eventually, I have to ask myself what it is I really want. And when I asked, I answered, to shatter my love in order to finally become capable of loving. How do you defy the laws of nature? Grace alone can do it. They said, the false God changes suffering into violence. The true God changes violence into suffering. It is necessary that I should suffer. It is necessary that I should suffer. It is necessary that I should suffer. Self-hypnosis, a kind of waiting. Trying to turn my pain away from hate and towards suffering. I weep as I walk to the woods. The weeping gets louder and louder the more I walk until I am in an opening surrounded by tall firs, where I begin to wail. Stagger, bend, pace, distort. I sit cross-legged, looking forward into the woods. I stop thinking of you, but continue wailing. Repetition. It is necessary that I should suffer until I am capable of love. Until I am capable of love, until I am capable of love. Little yellow flowers. It is necessary that I should suffer. The wind in the birch. It is necessary that I should suffer. It is necessary for me to be porous, because it is necessary that I should suffer. This is a state of hyperconsciousness. Vey willed herself with all her strength into a place of weakness. I walk out of the woods without shattering any of my pain, but without having multiplied it either. But it's much more wholesome to be able to take yourself to the woods and not let them chase you there down Daydream Street. I don't necessarily feel like I defied the laws of nature, but I know that something happened there in the woods, some kind of communion. Through this grief, I learned to let hate pass through me, as silence and sadness have passed through me. I am not woman. I am nothing. If I make myself nothing, if I wait to become nothing, I can, interspersed with love and hate, sometimes be flicker and flow becoming. I can let the dream pass through me, let the unnameable pass through me. Crying leads you through concentric rings of sadness. You close your eyes and travel outwards through a vortex that draws you towards the saddest thing of all. And the saddest thing of all isn't anything but sadness. It's too big to see or name. Approaching it's like seeing God. It makes you crazy. Because as you fall, you start to feel yourself approaching some place from which it will not be possible to retrace your steps back out. It's much too large and ancient. There are too many parts of other people in it for one person to absorb. Grief is information. Emotion is a state of hyperconsciousness, a current that dissolves the boundaries of a person's subjectivity. I will be affected by the world. There is no such thing as personal. Becoming my bleeding body, becoming decay, becoming suffering, exploring the fullness of negative space, buried space, unnameable or misnamed places. I think this is the last part. Overflow. I am part of the part that once was everything, part of the darkness which gave birth to light. It's in the vibrations of whale and bird song, the reason for wanting to live or wanting to die, the heart of the soil inching its way up my leg. How do we get back to the place where all of us were everything? In an article titled "The Self Beyond Itself, Further Reflections on Spinoza's Systems Theory of Ethics," Heidi M. Raven explores the relation of minds to the world with reference to research in the field of neuroscience. Raven explains that the more scientists investigate the nature of consciousness, the more the notion of individual minds as disembodied and removed from all context starts to fall away. Both the content and the structure of the mind, according to this model, are not boundaried but fluid. Our consciousnesses include our bodies, spill out of them even into the rest of the world. Raven writes, "Where do you stop and where does the rest of the world begin? There is no reason to suppose that the critical boundary is found in our brains or our skin. The boundaries of distinct forms are permeable. What have been taken for distinct substances are starting to look more like converging substances, less separate, more like one. What will draw me closer to convergence? When and where do I feel this energy? The tops of trees before sunset in almost April. They sway, and I slip. My crocus tongue, I want to mean something more than speaking. Where meaning collapses is not absence, but presence. A fullness so full your body starts to slip away from itself, expands, making space for the spat out to accommodate its substance, to draw it in by drawing yourself out, to converge, to hold, to be held by that place. Because there isn't any separation anymore between you and what you see. Trying not to let fear colonize my landscape. I'm not dying, I'm opening. Spring is approaching now, but my red is still spreading out over everything, consuming the world with its breath. A generous ache, an expanding, liquefying, there are too many people inside of me ache. Because there isn't any separation anymore between you and what you see. And somehow, I only manage to collect their pain. But there are more ways than this to feel the world inside of you. These days, the most connecting forces I feel are despair and sadness. I am trying to give them a little break. This section is about hope, so it is also about water. I can't talk anymore about despair. What is it about the ocean, rivers too, that overwhelms me with information to the point of a calm? Sometimes I think it's the way water moves through places and people. So that by sitting in it you become anyway, surrounded by the whole world. So fluid, so accommodating, you cannot be alone. It is something you tap into, not grab hold of. Biking really fast at night when you can feel the company of the leaves and the wind. There's no catching, just a moving. Just brief glimpses of one little pocket of the world, and that's okay. There is knowledge in this pocket. Vibrations, waves, oscillations, resonances affect living bodies. Living beings are vibratory beings. Vibration is their mode of differentiation, the way they enhance and enjoy the forces of the earth itself. That is why to become a part of the part is the most beautiful. Becoming so incomplete without the rest, it's impossible to imagine you are not being held, cradled. And bringing that tininess back to conversation, to knowledge. It often comes across as not really knowing anything, and it's true, it isn't something that is inside of you. It's something moved through and touched, changed by. This knowing usually happens by moving or by staring, and it feels a bit like a trance. There is too many different kinds of information to categorize or make sense of linearly. I used to think, when I felt this way, that I wanted to escape my body. Now I realize it could never happen without my body, that it is being a body that enables it. It's an opening, opening. So that as you move through something, it also moves through you. You create each other in that moment, with that movement. You become a body through which a dream flows. I'm not always capable of this. And also, how do you strike the right balance between allowing yourself to be small and maintaining conversation, sharing information with others? And for how long? How long can you open for? Eventually, there comes a feeling similar to that of coming out of winter. This afternoon, Ian and I sat in the kitchen together. I made coffee, and the light swallowed Ian so perfectly that I started feeling at home here without having to be sad. This is where you realize that joy also has affect, that a bright day spreads itself across you almost as easily as sadness and fear do. Note, however, that it isn't the return of some dissociative and sterile sense of reason, but a contextual feeling thought that is always formed and defined by space and time. The most hellish place I know is the place where all context falls away and I float above space and time and connection. Why would I want my knowledge to come from there? Sacred space is sacred because of the collectivity it distills. Despair is not the only connecting emotional force. I do not have to allow myself to be overcome with grief information all the time. Beauty transpires in the midst of the ache. Things exist together despite impossibility. I hope to be capable of this contradiction. Opening and closing, opening and closing. Wasn't I talking about movement? That's it.